Thank you to all our panelists. I think you have all made very, very strong and powerful presentations about not only the dire situation in Tunisia, a year and a half after the coup of July 25, but also on what the US policy should be and what it has been, which to summarize, I think most of you, is that it has been a real disappointment. Given that Tunisia was so close to achieving the dream of democracy in the Arab world, was so close to becoming a real democracy and a working, functioning democracy, still had problems. Still, the work was not done for sure. Still problems economically, in particular. The pandemic made the economic situation a lot worse. I was there in 2020 and 2021, and you can feel the economic collapse really that happened during the pandemic, certainly the first year. I want to mention the case of Khiyam Turki. Khiyam Turki is a politician. He is secular but not anti-Nahda. He's secular but willing to dialogue with the Nahda. And he's been involved for the last 7 months in organizing meetings between opposition leaders, just on the point that you mentioned, Shadi, to try to unite the opposition and develop a roadmap for democracy. Well, he was arrested last Saturday. And the charge against him is conspiracy against the security of the state for two things: for organizing these meetings between opposition leaders, and many of these meetings were in his home, and also for meeting with 2 US diplomats, that apparently he had lunch or dinner with 2 US diplomats who, were interested to know what was going on in Tunisia. These are the charges now, and we have not heard a single statement from the Biden administration yet on his arrest. And it's been 5 days since Saturday. Many other politicians have been arrested. Nourdin Lebhiri is undergoing surgery right now, full anesthesia surgery. And his health is really deteriorating because he was beaten during his arrest. They broke his elbow, and it was untreated since his arrest, and so now he's undergoing surgery, and still no statement from the Biden administration about these arrests, about these violations of human rights, and many of them were arrested, of the other politicians were arrested for simply putting Facebook posts for their opinions on Facebook, calling it a coup or calling for the opposition to unite against the coup. Now that has become, or Qais Said wants to make it a crime, punishable by 5 to 10 years of jail for posting something on Facebook or on Twitter. This is the level that Tunisia has become 1.5 years after the coup of July 20, and still no statement to this day from the State Department or the National Security Council or the White House or even Congress, for God's sake, about these really severe violations. So I think the situation is really, really alarming, and I think the United States really needs to review its policies towards the Qais Said regime. The policy of half-baked criticism and half-baked pressure has obviously not worked for the past 1.5 years, and as you put it, Shadi, half, cutting the assistance in half has not worked. The situation has gotten worse and worse every day, and I think the US needs to really revamp and review and change its policy and put a lot more pressure on Qais Said and also on the Tunisian military. I think the Tunisian military will never jeopardize their relationship with the US military and with the US government, because it's a long-standing relationship that has been, over 50 years since independence. They have a huge relations, huge interest with the US military, and they're not willing to jeopardize that. And all we're asking them to do is to stay out of politics. That's all. We're not asking them to remove Qais Said or to organize a coup against Qais Said or anything like that. Just go back to your barracks and stay as a professional Republican army should be out of politics. That's the way it has been since independence. But now they're getting into politics, and I think the US needs to issue very clear statement, even more clear than the statement that the Secretary of Defense issued last, I think, June or July. It has to be very clear that this is totally unacceptable. And again, the US administration still has not made that statement and has not made that clear reference to the Tunisian military must step out of politics, must stay out of politics. Okay, we're going to take about 15, maybe 20 minutes of questions. If you have questions, you can ask in Q&A. So we're going to give priority to Q&A first. The first question by Mansaf Khadr: if one takes into consideration US foreign policy vis-a-vis Egypt since 2013, then what to expect from US foreign policy regarding Tunisia since July 2021? So I guess it's about the similarity or the differences between Egypt and Tunisia and the response of the US government. Another question from Kevin Coyne is, what role should the UGTT play right now? What is the role of the UGTT and what role can they play or should they play right now? So let's answer those two questions and then we will move on to other questions. Anybody wants to answer one of these two questions? Comparisons with Egypt and the role of UGTT.
I can say something on the comparison with Egypt, but Sharon's actually done a lot of, I want to just make sure Sharon says something about it too, because he's done a lot of good comparative work on Egypt and Tunisia and their militaries. But, from my standpoint, so many of the people who were involved in Obama's Egypt policy and Middle East policy, which I think we're all pretty critical of, have returned and play some role in the Biden administration. So, one way of looking at it is that there is some continuity. And the sense that I get, from a number of folks I've talked to in state and the NSC over the past year or two, is what I remember from the Obama administration, this sense of exhaustion with the Middle East, this sense that almost verges on a certain way of looking at Arabs. It's not usually explicit, but it is a version of, look, we tried with you guys in the early part of the Arab Spring, then there was civil war and all this other stuff and millennia-old conflict. Some of you might remember in his State of the Union in 2013, I believe, Barack Obama explicitly said this. He was pretty much raising up his hands and saying, millennia-old hatreds. That is what is going on in the Middle East. So this is not just my interpretation of what they think. They've actually sometimes also said it outright. The kind of de facto director of Middle East policy in the Biden administration is a big part of the problem. He was also there under Obama. I don't like naming names, but I do think that, without him changing his approach to the Middle East, so I'm talking about Brett McGurk here, who's the National Security Council coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa. Smart, competent guy in many ways, but he does not, let me put this nicely, he doesn't really believe in democracy in the Middle East. And my hope is that, that at some point there could be someone new in that position. Certainly, if there's a Democratic administration 2024 onwards, I think a top priority for pro-democracy advocates is to make sure Brett McGurk doesn't get a senior position on Middle East policy. And the reason that he runs Middle East policy right now and has very little pushback is because Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, again, a very smart, even brilliant guy, doesn't care about the Middle East. That he doesn't care about democracy in the Middle East. He's never going to focus on it. He's not going to put pressure on Brett McGurk to do more. So in some ways, I feel like it's partly a personnel problem, and that's just worth keeping in mind. And I think all of us who work in this space need to think much more carefully about how we can organize and prepare ourselves for 2024 in terms of trying to encourage and support better officials in these key positions.
Okay, Sharon?
Sure. So let me talk a bit about the military. Certainly the response of the US to Egypt 2013 and July 2021 for Tunisia are similar in terms of trying to maintain military assistance. And that's a normal response from the US, and both due to inertia of trying to maintain what you've done before, but especially for security assistance, it's very easy for DoD as well as others to make the argument that security cooperation trumps all other values, that's most important in our relationship. And especially for some of these military training programs, the argument is always very compelling within the administration that we must preserve our relations and our contacts because those relationships are going to help us moving forward. And so there's always a tendency not to suspend military assistance, even when it's explicitly a coup, like in Egypt 2013, and certainly when it's less clear, like in July 2021. There is, of course, an important difference, right? July 2021 was not a military coup. The military was certainly involved, and they helped to close the parliament. They've been holding these military trials, but it was not a military coup. At its core, it was a presidential coup. And so that, in turn, does show some differences also in terms of the Tunisian military's behavior as opposed to Egypt's. On the one hand, we would have thought its professionalism, its apolitical professionalism would mean it wouldn't obey and close the parliament. But as I mentioned earlier, the parts of its professionalism that it knows best, which is to defer to the president, to obey his orders, to try to stay out of political matters, all of those pushed it actually to obey this order, to defer to the president that, yeah, it's probably constitutional, to think that explicitly refusing would have been a more political action. All of that, its professionalism, and therefore led it to obey and close the parliament. And that's why I think it's important to have these discussions within the Tunisian military about what professionalism actually means moving forward. But the other major reason why the Tunisian military obeyed and closed the parliament, and this here is a similarity with Egypt, is that there was some gains to be had in terms of its corporate interests, that Kais Saied was advancing the military's interests, continuing to increase the budget, for instance, despite COVID, when you might have expected the budget to instead go to the Ministry of Health, to appoint military doctors as the Minister of Health, more generally to give the military regular access to the president, political access that it did not have previously. All of that led it to think that its gains are going to be advanced even further if it supports this coup. And they were proven right to some extent. Now you see a general appointed as Minister of Agriculture, you see the budget increasing further, you see the political influence of the military growing even further. And so in that sense, there are gains that the military is having. But there are also some costs, and this is important. There are costs in terms of its image, domestically and abroad. at home, some Tunisians are waking up and realizing the Tunisian military is not the neutral professional military they thought it was. It does seem to be taking sides. And the Tunisian military doesn't like their image being tarnished. And so if that increases moving forward, that could shift the military's behavior. But I don't think it's going to increase, because the main thing that's tarnishing the Tunisian military's image, which is the military tanks around the parliament, that's soon going to go away. Once this new parliament takes office, that's going to be reopened, and you won't visibly see the military defending Kais Saied's coup anymore. And so instead, the cost that I think could possibly increase is the one about its international image, and in turn the potential break with relations or reduction in relations with the US moving forward. And so that, I think, gives the US some leverage, and maybe is the only leverage that could switch the Tunisian military's calculations moving forward, that there must be a real threat that military aid will be cut in half for sure, repurposed perhaps, but really on the line fully, given, as Monica noted, the use of these counterterrorism institutions, but language as well, in terms of justifying the crackdown that's occurring today. Those costs, the foreign costs, are really the only ones I think could switch the Tunisian military moving forward.
Okay. Eric or Monica, anything on the UGTT and the role of the UGTT?
If it was okay with you, I had about like 3 or 4 points that I was going to make that would respond to a lot of the questions that have come in on the chat box simultaneously. I'm happy to do that now or whenever you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we still have another 5 or 10 minutes, but go ahead. You can start.
Okay. I'll just add one thing to what Shadi and Sharon have said on Egypt, which is to reprise a comment from my initial remarks. We had a lot of reason historically and geostrategically to predict the United States would resume its support for dictatorship in Tunisia. In Egypt, sorry. But in Tunisia, we had no such reasons. The US has typically been comparatively unsullied when it comes to supporting dictatorships in Tunisia. And like I said, it doesn't have any clear cross-cutting interests there, be it petrol, oil, or support for Israel. Whereas Egypt has been one of the top recipients of US foreign aid for decades now. So there does not exist a clear litmus test for the Biden administration's support for democracy abroad, or lack thereof, in Tunisia, and it's been making the wrong choices. When it comes to UGTT, if UGTT decided tomorrow to pick up the phone and call all of the political parties and major civil society movements opposed to Kais Saied's regime, it could be the standard bearer of the cross-ideological opposition coalition that we've all been waiting for. But it has not done that because of what Hamel Hamami, the Tunisian Marxist leftist, said to me in a great interview. He called it in the summer of 2021, the Ennahda syndrome that Shadi had alluded to. And it's this Ennahda syndrome, this paranoia about, this almost visceral revulsion against working with Ennahda, that's preventing UGTT from doing that. UGTT has itself experienced a move towards authoritarianism inside the union, with the leadership of its current Secretary General Nourdine Taboubi, who is also a lot more focused on consolidating his own unilateral control of the labor union than he is in taking up that 2015 Nobel Prize mantle again. UGTT was a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize during Tunisia's democratic transition, and putting the interest of the country first, which is very disappointing, but not surprising for close observers of UGTT over the past decades. I wanted to say something about the IMF aid, potential IMF deal. I would add that an IMF agreement with Kais Saied under these circumstances is actually